All right, so thank you very much for attending this event. This is Decentralized Disruption. Again, we'll be discussing blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and smart contracts, among other technologies related to the field. This is the first, and what we hope will be a long and successful series of panel discussions around technologies like quantum computing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other interesting technologies as they come to the forefront. We went through the audience questions already, so let's just go ahead and get stuck into it, if that's okay. I'd like to start off by asking Kyle, speaking of blockchain, what is this blockchain thing that we hear so much about, and why is there so much hype around it?
If I speak like, ooh, I can speak even here and you can hear me. Very good. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Yeah? All right, good. Hi, my name is Kyle. I'm CEO of a company called Ohalo. But to your question, Jay, blockchain is really it's a distributed database, right? So we had databases before networking, and you had to take the data from one room to another. And then we had networking where you could like link two databases together, but the actual data was never synced. And then we're kind of smashing all that down into one thing, right? So we have kind of a networked distributed database where the data is always the same everywhere. And that's the basic blockchain. There's other versions of blockchain like Ethereum where you can do more sophisticated things on top of that. But you know, it's a database where everything is always the same on every single instance of that database.
Perfect, thank you. And my apologies, we're going to backtrack for 1 second. I forgot the introductions of the panel. My bad. As soon as you started talking, I realized that.
Yeah.
So Kyle, you've introduced yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm Anthony Lussomi. I'm a co-founder at Swissborg. We are a wealth management initiative in the blockchain industry. We are based in Switzerland, and we travel today to meet you and discuss about blockchain.
Hey everybody, my name is Paul Linsell. I'm the COO of Gimmer. Gimmer is an automated cryptocurrency trading platform. We're trying to gamify cryptocurrency trading through machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're trying to make it very fun and accessible for every type of customer.
Hi, I'm Dimitri from Juru. We're building a digital identity platform where the focus is very much on putting the individual back in control of his personal data and trying to provide a solution to various parties when it comes to GDPR compliance.
Thank you very much. I am Jay Miller, your forgetful host and chair for the evening. I work in the kind of consulting space with lots of different types of startups, to include a few very interesting blockchain-focused startups, and have been very interested in the space for about 1.5 years now. And I see great potential in what all these guys here are doing and a lot of the other companies in the space. So back to blockchain. Anthony, I think you were going to build on the answer there.
Yeah, so thank you, Kyle, for the technical definition of the blockchain. I think it was very helpful. But I want to add as well that blockchain is not only a technology, that's as well a philosophy. The philosophy is we have a bunch of people here and there that do not trust anymore the central authority to defend their own interest. So the initiative of the blockchain technology is to bring an alternative to the central authority that we all know, and to build somehow a self-regulated system when you can operate and communicate with each other. And in a society as complex as the one we are living in, and trading and transaction is a key part of communicating with each other. And that's the initiative from that the blockchain technology want to bring into the table. So not only is the technology is just the ending consequence of a philosophy.
And if I can ask a question to the whole panel, if you think about key applications of this technology, or maybe industries where we'll see the most disruption from this technology, which would those be?
I think initially the financial services is probably the first one that springs to mind. But even in that realm, for me, there's some untapped, undisrupted markets still. I think the insurance market is yet to be fully disrupted. But then, you know, there's loads of other markets as well. I mean, even from to just the voting and stuff like that. So that's totally changing the way people can access votes and have their say.
Excellent. Any other input on that question before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of keep it simple, stupid model is applicable to blockchain, right? So blockchain is still a very young technology, and the use cases are well, by that very fact, need to be very simple. So things that you can program in like 1,000 lines of code or something is probably reasonable to implement in a blockchain at this day and age. And then as we go on, it'll get more and more complex, just as computer systems have gotten more and more complex over the years.
Perfect. And if you think of industries, I think often when these new technologies come to the forefront, the hype is that they're going to change everything and change the world and make us taller and better looking, and your dog's going to love you more and all this sort of stuff. But in reality, it doesn't always apply to every industry. So might there be a couple of examples of industries where maybe this technology won't be so disruptive? Yeah, Dimitri.
I think there's a lot of hype going on blockchain and the regulatory space. I think most of that will fade away because when it comes to the actual task of the regulation and lawyers, it's more about the sense of advisory and not as much about executing preset logic.
Okay.
We had a large discussion with the land registry owner. They had been looking into blockchain for over 2 years now, and they've advised against it because actually the value of a notary in this entire process is more about the human factor than it is about the administration behind it. So as long as the human factor is important,
Right.
I think blockchain will not succeed.
Okay, interesting. And another question to you, Dimitri. So a story that's very much in the news at this moment is the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica thing that's going on, right? Everyone's familiar with that? I trust nobody's missed it. So Dimitri, if you think about this issue that's going on with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, oftentimes when you read about blockchain and technologies around it, you hear about things like a decentralized version of Uber, for example, that allows drivers and riders to connect without this middleman or middle company in between the two. There are talks around things like Airbnb or a D-Airbnb. Would it have avoided all this trouble that Facebook's currently found itself in if there were a decentralized version of a social network like Facebook? Is that even possible?
I think that's a really difficult question. I think Facebook has become something it never set out to be. It became the largest identity broker in the world, and somehow it comes with responsibility that nobody wants to take. He's in it for the advertising money. But if we boil it down to what it should be, basically I should be able to communicate with another party, someone that I trust. I should be able to share personal information, but only with that party, without sharing it with everyone. And I think there's some initiatives in the blockchain space actually coming up, trying to create this social talking or social way of creating content, and actually rewarding the people that are creating the content. And I think that's a good thing. And
Okay.
I think in the end, Facebook will decline in
Yeah.
user base.
Okay, we shall see. I understand the delete Facebook hashtag has not taken on that much momentum as of yet. We shall see. We'll keep a close eye on that. Paul, a question for you. If you think about this technology, and obviously there's, I think, a lot of opportunity for companies to have great success out of this. But if you think about the technology's ability to affect social change for good, are there opportunities or the possibility for that to happen via this technology or the surrounding technologies?
Yeah, definitely. I think every day I meet someone new and find a new innovation that's kind of doing that. And quite often when you look at sort of third world countries, that's where you see some of that happening the most. For example, when people don't have access to banks. So actually by doing something through a mobile blockchain or something that can really provide innovation there. The point I've touched about on voting as well. So to actually put the ability for people to vote and that be an uncorruptible vote via a blockchain. Seeing stuff now as well to kind of bring people together in a community where they start to lend to each other. And using the blockchain to make sure that it's all all transparent and done properly. Whereas, I mean, we've had that in the past with social lending platforms like Kiva and stuff, but now sort of seeing that on the blockchain too, which is quite exciting. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. Kyle, I think a question for you. We discussed this a bit prior to the event beginning. and a bit of a discussion came up amongst the panel. There's lots of terms that fly around. We hear about blockchain, tokens, initial coin offerings, all sorts of interesting terms. A couple that seem to kind of get confused with each other are blockchain and this term of distributed ledger technology. Are these different terms for the same thing, or are they indeed different things?
Yeah, distributed ledger technology was kind of invented by banks who internally couldn't countenance saying the word blockchain, and so their bosses asked them to call it something else. And so they built something called distributed ledger technology, and so that's kind of where that all came from. There's some pedantic arguments around, you know, what aspects of blockchain technology are implemented in which part of blockchain and versus distributed ledger, but they're essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Any other takes on that before we?
No, for me they're the same thing, and you know, I know there's varying views on it, but when you break down the two, it's pretty much the same thing. So
Okay.
you can layer up
Yeah.
other stuff, but
Yeah. Okay. Thanks
Yeah.
very much.
So we had this discussion before, but at the end it just questioned the fact: are you going through a public blockchain, which need, on top of the distributed ledger technology, a consensus network protocol, or are you going through a private blockchain where you have already trusted parties into the network? And at the end, it's pretty the same question.
Cool. Okay. And Dimitri, back to you. If we think about this technology, how do we move forward creating awareness of the technology, first of all, which I think we're maybe doing here a little bit this evening, but secondly, how do we create trust in this technology so that it maybe leads to a bigger adoption?
I think if we look at everything that's happening right now with ICOs, which I guess we'll go into deeper
We will.
Later on, the biggest issue is trust, because there's a lot of scams going on, and while inherently the technology is trustworthy, the truth is in the technology. But I think we can create more adoption by creating a network that actually, this is why we got into the identity and personal data business, because if we can identify everyone uniquely, we can basically start building a trust network without knowing each other personally. Somehow we need to do this with what's happening in the blockchain space. Like if a new blockchain startup arises out of nothing and they have a white paper that's half a page long, somehow it could be sufficient if you know that the team behind it is actually a team of trustworthy people, and that could actually create a lot of awareness or a lot of adoption, easier adoption, if we know everyone in the space is trustworthy.
Yeah, okay. I would echo that. I mean, like, you need to solve problems and deliver value to people. And once we see more of these projects actually delivering value to people, that's when we're going to get trust. And I think regulation is actually a big part of that. I know we're going to get to regulation later on, but I mean, there's tons of fraud in the area right now, and that needs to stop. And that's just taking down the entire, edifice of blockchain. The technology itself, I mean, there's several things that you can trust it. I mean, the technology works. People are using it for real things. So the technology itself, I think, is trustworthy as long as you have a decent architecture that takes advantage of the key elements of it.
Okay, great. So a couple more questions in this space, and we're going to just maybe shoot out to the audience for a question or two if you have them on the topic. But before we do that, Anthony, a question for you. This term community-centric often comes up when you're reading about this technology and things happening in the space. I believe I actually read that on your white paper.
Yep.
What does that mean in your company? What is community-centric?
Well, we mentioned the Facebook case before, and I think one of the biggest added value of the blockchain is it could be much more. As building network, you can have this much more community-centric approach. So coming back on this Facebook example, one of the biggest improvement of blockchain is not technological centric, is about accounting. So as an individual, when I create data on Facebook, I just allow the accounting system as it's defined today, just allow Facebook to monetize this data. On the other hand, because blockchain technology is really changing the way we do accountancy. As an individual, when I create data, I can claim the ownership of this data through blockchain technology, through the concept of tokenization. And because I own what I produce, then I can trade this ownership. And this is really where blockchain technology could improve the current situation concerning ownership and the trading of this ownership. So at the end, because the technology improve the current situation with corporatism, you can have a much more community-centric approach. In our case, what we do at Swissborg, we are creating a financial ecosystem where every individual could contribute to the decision-making system. And this is one brick of the utility of our token. But going forward, we want to integrate more and more utility to the token. So I can give a very practical example. When you use your internet banking application, by using this application, you get a knowledge out of the usage of the application. And there is no way right now for your bank for you to monetize this knowledge, which means that, for example, if you help your friend to get into the application and get a better usage of the application, you will not get rewarded for that. In a system like Swissborg, by using the different services at Swissborg, then you get the knowledge and you have another application on the side where you can help other people to get familiar with the ecosystem of Swissborg and get rewarded. And this is where we get much more community-centric rather than the traditional financial institution.
Perfect, thank you for that. So is there a question, maybe one quick question from the audience and what we've covered so far? And if you would please wait till we get a mic into your hands so we can pick up your voice. I think in the back onto the audience's left side. Thank you very much. It's coming your way.
Thank you. It's a very simple, basic question. I'm a complete beginner at this. Just in practical terms, if I wanted to use blockchain to organize a vote amongst the audience, how would I do it? What steps do I need to take?
Who would like to step up for that one? Kyle? Oh,
So
sorry.
you can go.
Yeah, go for it. So at Swissborg, we use this so-called referendum where when we want to improve the current technological stack, so basically the application that we provide to the community, we use the notion of referendum, which means that we ask to the community either we should do this or this. We had a referendum like 3 days ago about should we develop the investment application on a mobile app, native app, or should we do that through a responsive web application? So the outcome was mobile. Anyway, so we use the notion of smart contracts. So basically, by you program something, then you use a blockchain. In our case, we use the Ethereum blockchain, and then we issue a token that is a proxy for voting. So each of the person that participate to the referendum, so the voting poll, receive a token, and then send the token to an Ethereum address that is one of the outcome of the poll. So by using smart contract, you can have a voting system that is transparent and could not be corrupted.
Maybe I'd like to pick up on that one.
Sure.
I think it's very important that in any blockchain technology, they've solved the issue of double spending. So when you create a token, it's uniquely yours. If you transfer it and saying I'm voting yes, then you cannot sell the token to someone else and have him vote no. It's every unique token is uniquely used for that purpose. So
Perfect, thank you very much. Does that answer your question, sir?
Do you need a pre-established community for this, or can you do this with when you send a token to somebody you've had no previous contact with?
Well, let me ask if it's okay with you in the kind of deference to time, if you don't mind taking that up with our panelists after we'd be happy to do so. Or if you join us at the pub after, we'd be happy to take it up with you there. So kind of transitioning from the topic of blockchain and getting into cryptocurrencies. And can I assume by show of hands there's some interest in cryptocurrencies out in the audience? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah.
They're
good.
from the LSE, come on.
Of course there's interest in cryptocurrencies. So I want to start this section with a couple of quotes related to cryptocurrencies. The first is from a book called The Business Blockchain, which is a book authored by a gentleman named William, and I have a tough time with his last name, Maguire, and Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder of Ethereum. It says here, what started as Bitcoin, the poster child cryptocurrency that captured our imagination, is leading to a multiplicity of blockchain-enabled businesses and implementations. Going forward, this is metamorphosing into something bigger, a crypto-tech-driven economy with unparalleled global value creation opportunities, not unlike the web zone economy. Now, of course, there are dissenting opinions to that, and another quote I'd like to throw out there is from a guy named Bill Gates, who a few of us may have heard of. He says that, and this is fairly recently, he says, right now, cryptocurrencies are used for things like buying fentanyl and other drugs, so it is a rare technology that has caused deaths in a fairly direct way. So a pretty strong statement by Mr. Gates there. I want to ask the panel reactions to Mr. Gates's statement about cryptocurrencies. How do we respond to that?
I think in general, if you look at a token, it's basically you can see it as a form of cash or as a form of transacting value, getting something for something else.
But
if you look
not
at
all of
crypto, and crypto is used, but crypto is being used to buy drugs on a global scale. But
Could it be argued that fiat currencies, currencies backed by
not
states,
nearly as much as the US dollar. Is the US dollar a bad tool? No.
Okay.
It's obviously if there's a tool available to exchange value, it will be abused.
Actually, like the U.S. dollar is a much better tool to buy drugs. Like
Is that from personal experience?
Yeah, it's non-traceable. Like, I mean, I used to work in the Bitcoin analytics space, and like you can like literally trace back where this stuff came from, and you're like, oh, it was that guy that bought it, you know.
No, really? Okay. Excellent.
But on the other hand, of course, you can buy drugs by using Bitcoin. But on the other hand, you have organizations like WikiLeaks that could not exist without Bitcoin, because all the authority, the regulators come after WikiLeaks to shut it down. And basically banks then just shut down the account of WikiLeaks. But because of Bitcoin, they have an alternative way to sustain and still express their voice and their opinion, which is good in other way.
I think also, I mean, bad news travels faster than good news, right? So the reality of cryptos being used in illegal circumstances, that's what's going to make headlines. No one's going to make a headline for something that's actually, making good or just a normal use of transfer of values.
No, that's a great point. So, Paul, to keep with you, so news broke recently over the weekend that one of the largest, if not the largest, cryptocurrency exchange, Coinbase, which I believe is out of the U.S., is now in talks with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the U.S. to become a licensed brokerage, thereby allowing them to trade in digital currencies that the SEC considers securities. Generally speaking, is this a good sign for the crypto community?
I think it's inevitable. I mean, everybody you're talking to is very much saying that regulation is coming in. The minute regulation comes in, then I think you're going to see more institutional money come into the space as well. My personal belief is that we're going to see initially a tighter regulation before it may then start to relax a little bit. So is it good? It's progress.
It's progress. Okay.
It's inevitable.
I think it's a great thing. Like you have tons of institutional money flooding in, funding great projects. You have reduction in fraud. You don't get like some guy in the street that just lost his life savings to some crappy crypto project. Like it's a great thing. Like it's an unmitigated good. And the future of like even a year from now will be securities on the blockchain tokenized that are tradable throughout the world. I mean, we're actually participating in a fund called 22X Fund that is a crypto-backed it's a token that's backed by startup securities. It's backed by equity, right? And so it's an unmitigated good. I think this regulation that's coming on board.
On the opposite side, what I see with too much regulation as well is you raise barrier to entry for newcomers, and at the end, this whole ICO stuff and things about entrepreneurship. And what we see in the traditional investment world is too much regulation sometimes, where you need to pay 100K to a lawyer to start your company when you don't even have the fund to start your own company. So at the end, regulation is good, of course, to welcome institutional, but too much regulation is bad as well, because at the end, it's always the same at the top that get the lion's share of it, because they have the money to finance lawyers, third-party consultant, etc.
Sure,
So.
sure.
But the problem there for me, though, is it's regulation on a global scale, because if you're trying to regulate blockchain, you need to regulate every single country that those nodes are existing in. So you've kind of you've either got to have an agreement, a consensus on the regulation itself, which we're a long way away from that, I believe. Because every country that blockchain or currency operates in, you need to account for their regulation.
Yeah, exactly. Just go to another country if you don't like the regulation. It raises the barrier to fraud, I think, is like one of the biggest things.
Yeah, it's already happening.
I think we have some dissenting opinions, but it makes for good conversation.
Yeah.
Actually, Paul, a question for you. What do you think it will take for cryptocurrencies, which are obviously very much in the public domain, but what will it take for them to be adopted, kind of into the mainstream, if you will?
I think accessibility. I mean, it's anybody that's jumped into the space will probably know that it's not the easiest thing in the world to get into. Just setting up a wallet is particularly challenging. So things need to be much simpler. You need to just reduce those barriers to entry and make it really accessible, which at the moment it's not.
Okay, that actually leads into my next question. Again, by show of hands with the audience, anyone currently invested in digital currencies in any form or fashion? A few of you. Okay. Did you?
Go LSE. Wow.
For the novices in the audience who may want to get into this, how I know you said it's difficult, but is it? And they go home and in 10 minutes later be signed up and be owning some form of digital currency, or are there many, many more hoops to jump through and things to be learned?
So it's difficult if you want to do it on the cheap. If you want to do it quick and easy, then the aforementioned Coinbase will make it very easy for you. As easy as just creating an account, validating your identity, and then buying in with a debit card or a credit card. I think they may accept as well. But they will charge you for that convenience, and it's a pretty hefty fee. Whereas if you actually want to do it on the cheaper side, then you need to go and set up a wallet. And I'm relatively tech savvy, and I looked at some of these wallets, and I was just like, what the hell does that mean? I had no idea what a hash code was when I first looked into this, and I opened up my Ether wallet and stuff like that. I was just like, I haven't got a clue. And I find it very, very challenging. There are wallets out there that are much easier to use. Mm-hmm. My personal preference is one called Exodus, which it's really simple, but you can't actually buy the currency from there. You still need to go to a broker or an exchange and buy and then transfer. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Kyle, back to you. So I'd asked a question around blockchain and asking, when you think about the power of this technology to do social good, when we think of cryptocurrencies, is there any ability there for cryptocurrencies to affect or be there for social good?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that it's a use case thing, right? So, like, to the extent that we're opening up possibilities for people to, in a very general sense, right, interact with each other in ways that they weren't formerly able to, I think it's a really great social good. I mean, you're basically coordinating people from around the world towards, based on some incentive structure to do something, right? And so I think that's really cool. I mean, I wouldn't think about it from like a CSR point of view. It's not like a social good in that sense of the word, but I think from like building, it's not going to like save the whales or anything like that. But the sense of coordinating humanity, it's really good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So moving into a bit of a few questions around initial coin offerings and tokens, and maybe to our two gents here to either side of me here in the crypto space. I know, Anthony, at Swissborg, you've recently completed a successful ICO. And I believe, Paul, at Gimmer, you are in the middle or about to begin
we've started one.
You have
we
started.
stopped it,
Okay.
and we're about to start another one.
Okay,
So that
excellent.
puts us in the territory of potentially doing two.
Okay,
Expert in these days.
excellent, excellent. So why do an ICO? Why not pursue the more traditional route of funding, starting with friends and family, maybe some angel investing, a venture capital fund, and then maybe off to an IPO? Why an ICO?
I think it's well, it's deemed to be a lot easier and quicker to raise capital.
Okay.
Having been through the last 9 months, I wouldn't typically agree with that. But
Okay.
yeah, it's easy to access a global market. You don't have to go down the VC route, so you can basically do a global crowd sale
Okay.
and raise money from people around the world in countries that you may not even know existed. So
Okay.
I would say, yeah. On top of that, I would say when you choose to do an ICO, you look to build a community. And when you look at the biggest taxi company in the world, not even own a single car, or the biggest accommodation platform, not even own a single room, it's because the most powerful asset that any company right now could create is community. You might choose to do an ICO to create a community that will become eventually your stronger asset, rather than go through the traditional private equity and VC sector when you raise money, and then you spend all this money, especially in financial services, to get clients and to create a community. And when you know the acquisition cost of a single client for fintech or wealth tech, it's just ridiculous. And when you go through an ICO, not only you raise money to develop your own project, but you build a community, which is, I repeat, the most single important asset of your company, especially in a world where platform is we shift from this pyramidal corporate model to a much more lateral platformization model. So that's a strong aspect.
do you, from your experience, do you think that everybody that's buying into your token sale is a potential customer? Because from my experience, there is kind of a herd mentality of ICO. There's an ICO community of people that literally just move from one to the next.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, speculation is part of the game, but I mean, we have built a strong core, a community that hopefully will help in the future to build a better product, a better approach, and we bring more clients as well. That's the network effect that is very important. But of course, there is people that invest just for speculative purpose.
Okay.
Because I think in that kind of utopia, we kind of say, well, actually, if you're going to be a customer of Gimmo, do you really need to buy $1 million worth of our tokens? Because that's like a lifetime of fees.
Right,
So you're clearly not a customer of our product.
Yes,
because
yeah.
you're investing in crazy sums of money.
Okay. One last question in the token space, then we're going to take maybe a question from the audience if anybody wants to kind of get set up with a token question. For your investors that do purchase your tokens, and you may have touched on this earlier, Anthony, what does the purchasing of tokens allow them to do? What power does it give them?
Yeah, so that's an approach that needs to be tackled from a project perspective. So every tokens fill a different purpose. In our case, we really want to build a wealth management ecosystem that is community-centric. So we want to take the community at the center stage of the decision, make them, reward them from the knowledge that they get from using our services, and offer them different kind of solution that all of the platform. Once again, when you think about Uber, there is no, they own no single car. So their asset is the community, but at the end, they get all the reward from the work of the community. I mean, when you are a taxi driver or even a customer of Uber, you basically building the platform. So you allow them to be what they be, but you get no reward out of that. And thanks to the blockchain, this is the occasion to take the community at the center stage and reward them for the trust and also the input that they give to the network. And it is exactly the purpose of our token, bring the community back at the center stage.
Perfect. Thank you very much
I would
for that.
actually like to
Okay.
respond to that. There's a flip side to the medal. Like if, for example, the reason why we didn't do an ICO as an identity platform is because we started thinking identity should be useful in real life scenarios. And if your approach is not C2C, but if your approach is more like, I want to be able to walk into an airport and actually take an airplane, or I want to be able to do my tax registration through a government portal, then you need corporate backing, then you need government backing, then you need banks backing you up, and they are all regulated markets, and at this point in time, it's impossible for them to buy tokens. From a regulatory point of view, the government cannot buy €1 million of Juru tokens, because there's no regulatory framework that allows them to do that. They need invoices in euros. So if your market or if your business model is B2B or B2B2C, then I think it's very hard to do a token sale, because it will actually stop or hamper your growth.
Okay, thank you very much.
But
So,
just, just the one thing.
very quickly,
Okay,
very
okay,
quickly,
very
go ahead,
quickly.
go ahead.
But it might change when the governments, like Sweden, will choose to issue their currency into the blockchain.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So we have a question from the audience. There, lady with the blonde hair right here.
Firstly, I should say I'm a lawyer. Sorry about that. I'm not charging 100 grand per company, so perhaps I'm in the wrong business. Anyway, a few years ago, I was working for a cryptocurrency exchange in Scandinavia, and then I went off and decided to do something else. But some of what you've actually sort of touched on here today does concern me. It's a sort of political philosophy and how we make cryptocurrency and blockchain really trendy, and it doesn't really originally need to be regulated. And we're sort of taking back control of kind of like the world. So my question is, perhaps you can explain in sort of technical terms, who are these miners? How regulated are they? Are they elected? Would you rather sort of trust your fortune to some sort of unknown people who are miners? Or would you actually rather trust it to your sort of central bank and your government? And is it really true that the computing power of Denmark is required? You know, the electrical system of Denmark, I don't know, is used for all the kind of computing power. Can you explain, you know, how we're going to get more electricity, how green it is, and all the rest of it? Thank you.
So if I'm clear, you're maybe a two-part question. Who are the miners first? And secondly, the power consumption.
Why is that better than trusting in
Okay. Thank you very much. I think in respect to time, we have to kind of break it down to a couple of the questions you had. So if we start with who are the miners?
The community,
I can.
effectively.
The community?
Yeah, anybody can be a miner. So you can just roll up some software and be a miner if you want. And then you can choose which version of the software to run. And based on that versioning, you choose which software will be the blockchain, essentially. So it's a community-based thing. So that's a different question. So
Yeah, that's our second question.
yeah, so that's what this technological structure of most consensus protocols and public blockchains are right now. Power is a problem with Bitcoin, definitely. A lot of power used, Ethereum less so. And then there's several kind of things that are happening in different blockchains that use different power. But I think it's a problem that's being solved, frankly. And a lot of people are actually putting mining equipment where they are trying to shed electricity, so they have too much electricity and the grid can't handle it. So if you think about like rural Canada, rural China, there's a lot of mining going on there where they actually are like need to put the electricity somewhere and then they shed it to mining equipment. But it's kind of a really complicated topic.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your questions. So I'm sorry, we're going to have, in respect to time, we'll have to move on. Sorry about that. So the last thing we're going to talk about here, we have about 15 minutes left before we get into the general Q&A where we can ask all the questions you like, is smart contracts. So, and I'd like to read another quote from, again, this book, The Business Blockchain, and there are more books than just this one. I just got some really good quotes from this one. And it states that smart contracts are a key underpinning of blockchain technology. If you do not understand smart contracts, then you do not understand the power of blockchains. They will be no less revolutionary than the invention of HTML markup language that has allowed information to be openly published and linked on the web. Smart contracts promise to program our world on the head of blockchains and potentially replace some of the functions currently executed by expensive or slow legacy intermediaries. So off of that, a question for, let's say a question for Kyle, what are smart contracts?
So LSE has had quite a good showing here. Who like codes at all? Like, does anybody actually? Oh wow, man! What an audience. Smart contracts are unfortunately named because they're not smart or contracts. They're essentially dumb programs that it's basically like a script that you put on the blockchain. You can call that blockchain, and they do the logic that you've programmed in. Hopefully, that logic doesn't have bugs in it, or you get things like the DAO, which lost people, $300 million or something. Yeah, they're just a computer program that you deploy to an address, and then you can call that address.
Okay. So what are some of the contexts in which these smart contracts or dumb programs can be or maybe are currently being used?
I think it's most useful in situations where you have a preset script of logic that you can execute when certain events happen, if then else. For example, if we look at private and permission blockchains in the supply chain, I think they bring a lot of value. Basically, you have the entire chain from the manufacturer up until the retailer agreeing on a private and permission blockchain, saying if we deploy a smart contract, a distributed application, saying if the goods have arrived at this geolocation, then the fund should be released to the manufacturer. It's a really simple statement, and it actually brings value. It saves you costs on customs.
And you need to be really careful when you're programming these things to only use them for what they're good for. So blockchains are really good at things like irreputability, basically saying, not having sometime in the future where somebody just says that didn't happen. You're like, yes, it did. It's written right there. Right. So they're really good for that kind of things. But if you're talking about just programming general programs completely in Solidity, which is the main smart contracting language right now, it's millions of times less efficient than a Java program would be. So you have to be really careful with your computing resources when you're programming smart contracts.
Okay, and understanding that smart contracts are code, how are they currently created? Can anybody kind of sit down and in a few minutes figure this out, or will it ever get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I code smart contracts. It's not rocket science. It's just like coding any other program.
I think one of the most used smart contracts is deploying your own token.
Yeah.
Ethereum,
yeah, that's true.
Just copy paste and.
Is it really? Okay, great. Sorry, were you going to say something, Anthony? Oh no, okay. Sorry.
I mean,
So-
there are services emerging where you can drag and drop and build your own smart contract.
There are.
So
Great.
without the program.
Yeah, most of it's just a lot of it's just open source on GitHub, so you can just download it like you do anything else, and you have your coding environment. And
Okay, so it could be done by kind of the average Joe almost without any specialized.
well, I mean, if you're a computer, if you can code, then
Yeah.
it would be doable. Yeah.
It is funny that the quote you mentioned came from a book written by Vitalik Buterin, who
Yes. Yeah.
created the smart contract blockchain.
Right,
So
yeah, of course.
obviously you will see a lot of value in that.
Of course you would. So, given that these are, appropriately or not called contracts, are these smart contracts legally enforceable? I heard a no.
Not for instance, I would say, but
Not for instance.
not for instance, but for example, in France, you have this initiative from the government that say if you are an unlisted company, you can use the blockchain as a ledger for your shareholder.
Okay.
So in a way, that's become legally enforceable, and this is where it is becoming more and more interesting. As Kyle says, it's still a very young technology. What is interesting is the premise of the technology. Right now, the applications that we see are quite limitative, and one of the reasons why, for example, is because all this Bitcoin and all the blockchain are not attached to identity, which means that I can perform very simple transaction. If I take the notes in my pocket, give it to you. Now it's belong to you,
You're still using pounds.
Yeah. So you don't have to claim the ownership just by bearing the notes. It's belong to you. If I don't have my key, but if I did some transaction with the key of my apartment, unfortunately, by holding the key doesn't mean that you hold the apartment and you can sell it. You can go there, invite some friends, have beers, but if you want to sell the flat, you can't. And this type of transaction, just moving the key from my pocket to his pocket, is the kind of transaction that you can observe on blockchain. And to perform higher degree of transaction, which means selling my flat from my pocket to his pocket, we need to have digital identity into the blockchain. And this is where we are heading, I guess. But right now, it's not yet ready.
Okay. You want that back?
Do we have time for a comment, or?
Oh, please, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I was going to say, you kind of changed my mind halfway through what you were saying. So I was going to say, no, they're not legally enforceable, and it's a bad idea. But sometimes there actually are legally enforceable. Like, I mean, if you think about Bitcoin, when you're transferring Bitcoin from one person to the other, that's like, you can prove that you have a private key. And so like currency applications are, I guess, legally enforceable, right? Like you can prove that something happened and therefore everything happened. So like really, really simple use cases of like, I have this Bitcoin and now Anthony has this Bitcoin is probably legally enforceable, I would imagine. But you know, that's a really very clear-cut example. I think I still think that it's probably a bad idea to make them legally enforceable in general, just because the law is built in a way that's very fuzzy, right? And so like we always, as society changes, we always change our laws and how we interpret those laws on the edge, and as we go on and have case law to build on all that stuff. So it's a good thing, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Flexibility.
So oftentimes when speaking of smart contracts, there's this term that kind of rolls around of smart oracles. Can somebody maybe address smart oracles, and what are smart oracles? Kyle, back to you.
So smart contracts, like I said, are really good. They're dumb programs that once you deploy them, they do exactly what you tell them to do. And so they're really good at, like, if data's already on chain, like they just do that thing and then that's all. But it's kind of like, this is going to be recorded, so
Be careful what you say.
bad stuff in, bad stuff out, right? So if you have bad data going in, you have to, you know, you're going to have bad data coming out, right? And so like you have to have some sort of trusted thing that's putting data into these smart contracts. So the kind of prototypical example is like, I want a smart contract that, you know, pays out some crop insurance if the weather stays above like 33 degrees over a period of a month or something, right? So like you would have an oracle of like a weather station somewhere that if this weather station stays above 33 degrees for over a month, then it's going to be feeding that data into the smart contract, and the smart contract will trigger an insurance payment after that.
Okay, oh, that's
And
interesting.
that's data from an external source rather than the blockchain, right?
Yeah, data from an external source. Yeah, that's the short version.
I think what we call an off-chain, if that's the
Yeah,
right term.
yeah.
Right term. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left before we get into the sort of general audience Q&A. So if we can, I'd like to ask just a couple of questions around regulation, everybody's favorite topic, I think, in the crypto space. First is this. Historically, regulators have regulated those central providers of trust, be they banks or whomever they are. But in this case, we have this technology where the central provider of trust is being disintermediated and the trust component is built into the technology. So given that situation, how do you regulate? And that's for anybody on the panel. Who wants to jump on that one?
I think that's where the regulators are struggling, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, I think I would like to pick up on that one.
Please.
Like, as I mentioned before, the land ownership and land titles. If we put everything on smart contracts, if we put everything on the blockchain, and somehow you were forced to sell under duress, or somehow, for example, in a marriage contract, you married a wife that's 4 times younger than you are, and you might have
That never happens.
not seen the proper reasoning behind it. If it is executed in a smart contract, there is nobody taking liability if beep hits the fan.
Okay.
So I think we will always have need for human interaction, saying, okay, a mistake happened, this shouldn't have happened, and we need a way to revoke what happened in the smart contract. So I think actually regulation will always be useful.
Okay, okay. And I think maybe one last question in here, and then we'll go into the Q&A, the general Q&A. Everybody's aware of GDPR, right? It's coming into effect May 25th, I believe. So we have this technology here, blockchain technology, that claims to be an immutable record of transactions. So once something goes in there, it's very hard, if not impossible, to take it out. Yet under GDPR, we have Article 17, I believe it is, that is the right to be forgotten where people can request that digital data about them be removed. So how can you have both of these existing in the same space? How can you have immutable records on the blockchain and also have a right to be forgotten?
Records.
Well, the answer is like super simple actually.
Is it? Okay.
It's like personal data within GDPR is defined as can you identify a person from this data. So the architecture that basically everybody uses in the blockchain space is putting a representation of the data that's not decipherable. It's a hash, so it just goes one way and not the other way. So you basically don't put the data on the chain in the first place.
No, but most hashes have turned out to be reversible at some point in time. So a hash might actually...
Oh, like, yeah, I mean, quantum computing and stuff, maybe, but like anybody reasonable.
It is immutable forever. It's not immutable for 3 years. So we need to have some way of not putting any data on chain that doesn't want to be publicly visible at some point in time. I would say whatever you put on the blockchain, you should be considering tagging it on your front wall in pink graffiti.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, like once quantum computing breaks all current ciphers, GDPR is a much less problematic thing than like your bank account or any of your online services or.
And coming back on the Facebook example, I mean, even the most advanced in terms of technology company could get hacked, or we have seen Uber. So there is no optimal solution, I would say. And as you mentioned, if quantums come to light, we have to worry much more than the replication on the blockchain or anything else.
And what we're doing at Gimmer with a decentralized application is that all of your personal data that's used to create your account is kept on your device, whereas anything that needs to be shared for other sources so people can use the data that your bots have done, that's what gets stored onto the blockchain. So we kind of try and segment it that way, which hopefully will get us around the Section 17, was it?
Article 17, yeah. Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate your input on all the different questions there. So I think we're just about to 8 o'clock. So I think this is a good point in time to, before we launch into the Q&A, let me ask the audience, does anyone need to head out at this point in time? We can break for a couple of moments if anybody needs to make an exit. Everyone's good?
We're that exciting.
All right, great. So if we have the mics ready to go, and I believe there were lots and lots of questions. So this is the general Q&A, so let them fly. I think we have a gentleman over here.
Just down here.
Gentleman with his hand up back there, 3, 4, 5 rows back.
Thanks. I'm George, a 2008 alum. And my question is on taxing cryptocurrencies. HMRC has chosen in the past not to go after old-fashioned virtual currencies like airline miles. Why should it go after cryptocurrencies in the future?
Okay. Who would like to jump on that one?
Yeah, I think at the end is always the same debate. Is about the classification of the tokens. Should it be securities? Should it be utility token, which in a sense are much more like a loyalty program? So we also come to the same question: how should we classify this token? If it's securities, then it will depend on jurisdiction. Is it capital gain, not capital gain? If it's a loyalty program, then yeah, that's the product, and it should come to a tax reasoning that will be different. So the first question that we need to solve before talking about tax is how we classify tokens. And my opinion is each token could be classified in a different category depending on its nature.
Thank you very much. And I believe, sir, you had a question? Sorry, other side of the room.
I think if there's an opportunity for a government to charge tax, then they will, right? So,
No.
But I think the downside to raising taxes is also if you tax something as an income, you have to accept as government that it will also be a loss when you lose money. So, for example, professional poker playing is not taxed because a lot of people would be reclaiming money. So
That's an excellent point, which is why I don't play poker.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was really interesting to listen all of you. And basically, you just mentioned the part of my question that I want to ask. So are we talking about the cryptocurrency or crypto assets? And just very simply, is it Bitcoin, crypto asset, or cryptocurrency? And then if it's currency, why do you buy it? Because in general, you don't buy like French franc or Swiss franc to keep it. You buy some other stuff to keep the value up. And then very small question about the zero knowledge proof concept. How can it help with the GDPR requirement with Article 17 or whatever?
Okay, so the first part of your question was, sorry.
It's about like cryptocurrency. Is it a currency or is it asset?
Asset,
And what
okay.
is like blockchain? Is it asset or currency, in your opinion, of course?
Okay.
I think it's still being classified. A point I kind of wanted to mention is, one of the things that we're toying with is the idea of calling a token sale a token swap, because some people don't even classify Ethereum as a currency. So how can you be buying something? How can you be doing a sale in something which isn't classified as a currency? So actually, if you position it as a swap, you may even get around the tax implications, and you may even get around that as well. So about classification, if it's classified as a currency yet.
Yeah, it depends on the country, though. Yeah. So Japan is very clearly a currency, right? And the regulator has recognized it as like a currency, and like so actually there's regulatory clarity that is really valuable there, and that's why there's tons of crypto activity in Japan, is because everybody's like, okay, this is a currency, we know how to deal with it. Let's pay our taxes. We just made millions last year. Let's pay the 40%. Like it's
So are we saying that will come with adoption? So the minute you can actually, because in Japan you can pay with your utility bills Bitcoin, but in the UK you can maybe go to Shoreditch and buy a cup of coffee. So
what
again,
was the second question?
adoption.
Zero knowledge proof
Zero knowledge proofs. Yeah.
and GDPR requirements.
Yeah, GDPR actually is not just right to be forgotten, everybody. You guys, it's like really, really complicated and probably has implications beyond just right to be forgotten for all of your businesses. So but specifically around the right to be forgotten, the zero knowledge proof, for those that don't know what that means, is essentially you can attest things without actually revealing the real data. So like the typical example that people give is like you go to a liquor shop and you can say that you're over, what's the drinking age in the UK? I just moved to the UK. What is it?
I don't actually know.
Whatever it is, 18. So you can go to a liquor shop and prove that you're over 18 without actually showing an ID. You can just like give them a private key that like does some logic, which is, it's nice, right? It'd be good, I think, if they can make that more performant, but they're super, super slow right now. Like almost unusably slow. So it's really quite specific use cases are needed for that, I think.
Okay, great. Other questions? If we have this, sorry, man, would you put your hand up again? Yeah, right there. Thanks. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. My question is, do you think there should be legal repercussions if somebody exploits a security vulnerability in a smart contract?
Good question.
Yeah.
Who wants to take that one? I see Kyle's thinking.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Like, because on one hand, like you're just doing the thing that people said, but on the other hand, you're going against the spirit of what they said. And then on the other hand, is there a legal contract or not? So I don't know, but it's an interesting question.
Maybe bears further thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, computer hacking, right, is against the law. You can't just like you can't do that, right? And but it's not really hacking if you're just finding a bug and then not reporting it, where it might be, like. And if you're doing it from another country, what does that mean?
So it sounds like it can get quite complicated.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
It's like lawyers always say, it depends.
Yeah. And then they invoice you.
If you've lost a load of money from that, then you would ultimately want legal support. But it's whether you want it in the first place to be regulated on what you're doing. So I think it's probably a trade-off there. But yeah,
Okay.
Interesting.
So a gentleman in the back there with his hand up. Good evening.
Evening, thank you for the talk. My question is, there are a couple of states that are thinking about getting into blockchain finances or currency. How will that impact the decentralized cryptocurrency? So if there's a centralized cryptocurrency that's sponsored or backed by a state.
Is that a good question for the two crypto guys?
I think a lot of people are trying, and I think it defeats the object of it unless you do more of a private blockchain. But I don't think anyone successfully has done it. I know of like Dubai Coin, but yeah, I think the evidence is yet to be made.
I believe UK is doing one now.
Doing and done is.
I think Bank of England is doing something.
Yeah.
But to me, it doesn't change the actual situation. I mean, even if the UK is issuing the pound on the blockchain and you can have a wallet with pounds, it doesn't change the fact that the pounds and the monetary policy is still decided by the BOE, which in the case of Bitcoin is not. So when you buy Bitcoin, you just buy an alternative payment system to any governance. So to me, it will just improve the broader adoption of the blockchain technology as a whole. So I see this initiative as something positive and not a competition to Bitcoin, which the model is unique.
Yeah, probably also like it would. I see it not so much competing with other cryptocurrencies or other currencies, but it's probably a lot faster to settle a lot of central banking transactions that depend on really antiquated kind of accounting for how money gets moved from one place to the other. Yeah. But as far as like a consumer level, like demand, probably not so much impact. But probably in the back end pipes, it's a bit better. Yeah.
Okay. Next question, gentleman right here, please, and then we'll come to you, sir, afterwards.
You mentioned in terms of fundraising, the advantages of the tokens and ICO versus VCs, which are more centralized. But what about crowdfunding, especially for the companies where the tokens don't have a direct use? We see lots of companies going through ICOs, distributing tokens to investors, but the tokens are not really needed. Why not just doing crowdfunding? It's not just a trend, and that will die in a few months or few years.
Yeah, I think you raise a very interesting question, and my personal opinion is this is where we are going. I mean, the blockchain, and it will part of the mass adoption of the blockchain. We will use tokenization for equities, debt, so all this traditional scheme that we know already. And from equity crowdfunding point of view, it's really improving the situation, because when you issue tokens, then you have a direct ownership of that tokens that you can exchange. So when you invest in the traditional equity crowdfunding campaign, basically as an investor, you have to wait between 5 to 7 years. Usually that's the usual cycle to get out from your initial investment, either from an IPO or the company that has been bought back by another company. And by using the blockchain, then you can tokenize your participation and exchange on the secondary market without waiting for this full cycle. So yeah, I guess in the future, and we see more and more projects. There is one in the UK that is called Thunderbeam, I guess, that is using blockchain technology to improve the equity crowdfunding technology. And I think that's the right direction. And as you mentioned, I think when you have to ask yourself when you want to raise capital, either if you need to have a community-centric approach or if you need equity capital market, like traditional equity capital market. And in the coming future, you will use the blockchain technology to raise more capital. But yeah.
So a quick side question. At Swissborg, you recently finished your ICO.
Yeah.
What was your hard cap? What were you aiming for?
50 million.
How quickly did you get there?
So we start at the end of December, and we finished the ICO at the beginning of January, so almost 20 days.
Yeah.
But yeah, the project we start at the beginning of last year, February.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But the actual sale lasted about 20 days.
Yeah, 20 days.
Okay.
About approximately 20 days.
Okay.
So that's quick, yeah.
Interesting. So the gentleman in the blue shirt right there has a question. Hello.
Hi there. Disclosure, I am also a lawyer. I find it amusing, this idea that regulation is coming. The reason that it costs £100,000 or probably more to raise equity capital is that the government, the legislature, has taken the view that we can't trust the people to invest in any old thing. We must protect them. Now, you can say that's the wrong view to take. People should be free to buy whatever they want at whatever risk. But the downside of all that, of course, is that someone in, for example, random small jurisdiction in remote part of the world sets up a company, boilerplate, shop, you issue a ton of shares, you push up the market, you get your dollars in, and then it turns out they bought nothing. The government has, rightly or wrongly, decided that we should ban people from being able to do that. That is the point of regulation. Now, not all of them, but certainly some of the ICOs you see out there, they have like a 5-page white paper.
Right.
There's quite possibly a security. I wonder how you justify we must make it cheaper to raise capital when the downside of that will inevitably be that some people do get ripped off. There is a purpose to all this regulation. That was just my question, really.
Okay, so how do you justify the...
Taking out an ICO without the full £100,000 process.
Okay. Who would like to approach that one?
So in 22X, like the security token that we're part of, we actually did pay your fees. Probably not yours, but
definitely not mine.
So we are kind of obeying the rules of each jurisdiction that we're offering the security in.
Okay, Anthony?
Yeah.
Because we don't want to go to jail.
Yeah, we do pretty same at Swissborg. I mean, we work with very competent lawyers. Now, my point is, for example, in France, you have the AMF, which currently working towards a very interesting approach where personally, I truly believe in self-regulated environment. And the AMF has this approach where as an ICO project, you can approach them, submit them a project with all the documentation. And if they say that's legit, then they issue like a passport that you can advertise to your community. So you can say, I have this project, I want to see the regulator, and I obtained this passport. And now I have the passport from the AMF. So that's the French regulator. Then it's up to the people that invest to verify if a project does get this passport or not. If it does not get this passport, it doesn't mean that it's not legit, but there is low chance. There is a huge chance, basically, that it could be a scam. But when we looked 10 years ago at the financial crisis, does the regulators, in combination with the financial institution, prevent from abuse from the public? I don't think so. The subprime crisis is a huge example that you can involve the best mathematician of all worlds, the best lawyers, and still at the end up with product that no one really understand, and you cannot protect the end investor and have a very huge impact just because you seems to be legit. And it's happening again. I mean, the leverage on the society has never been so high. So we're going to see what's going to happen. But I don't think because you just put more and more layer that at the end you obtain a better system, because it's just demagogy in a sense. And I think the ICO, of course, there is a lot of scam and people need to be more protected. But people, when they invest, they need to be more responsible as well. And it's not because you once again, you have multiple layer that you can that at the end you protect them. I think at the end it's the opposite.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question and the disclaimer. Other questions? Anyone in the audience? Anything else? Am I missing one? Oh, sorry, right there. Thank you. Hello, sir.
Hello, thank you. My question is on the cryptocurrency. And each currency has an economist from the LSE. A currency has to have 3 characteristics, and all of these are nested in value. So where is the driver, the source of value of cryptocurrencies coming? What is the source of it, and how robust is the source? And linked to that is to tokens. With an equity, when there's a liquidation, the residual is distributed among the shareholders. Is it the same with a token?
Good question.
What are the 3 conditions? I didn't do my homework.
It's transactionary, storage of value, and precautionary.
Transaction, storage of value, and
Precautionary.
What's precautionary?
I don't know.
In case something goes wrong, you save up, and then if you're sick, we don't have a national health service, you pay for it.
Okay.
Anyone?
Well, I think it depends on what you're talking about, right? So if we're talking about Bitcoin, I think it probably meets that hurdle. No?
No.
All right. Well, the Japanese government disagrees.
Sorry, did you say transactionary?
Well, I said Bitcoin, but...
transactionary, yes, that's the only thing. But there's a value. So it's the value of that transaction. So he needs to hold the value. So where is that? What's the source of that value?
Oh, I don't know.
How robust is that value?
It's the trust in the system, but I'm not an economist, so I'm gonna fall down here.
I mean, it's like every things that we have into our system is about trust. I mean, the notes that I have in my pockets could worth nothing because the paper that it's needed to produce these notes is, I mean, the market to transact these notes is very low. So the intrinsic value of every note is very low, and only because I trust this accounting system, because at the end, notes are just the accounting system that just
they represent belief in the system, right? So I'm gonna say this in front of a room full of economists as a non-economist. But you know, at the end of World War II, Germany was underwater with debt. Their money was worth almost nothing, and
World War One.
Oh, World War One, and their money was worth almost nothing, and people didn't believe in their mark anymore, right? And so it comes from just belief in it, right?
Perhaps we should. It's going to be a longer. Maybe we should take it afterwards.
Yeah.
That's an excellent idea. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, my question is about the scalability of blockchain. Are there technical limits? If everyone has to record all the transactions, are there going to be data limits or scalability issues related to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
What are they? Can you develop a bit more?
So Vitalik Buterin had a really good presentation a couple weeks ago. I watched the YouTube video of it at what's the name of that conference? Like Deconomy or something like that. You could look it up on the internet. But he kind of gave an analysis of like how performant blockchain is against normal technologies like a database or something like that. And it came out to be around 1.04 million times less efficient than a normal database. But then you get the other things that you can't get in a regular database, like irrefutability, decentralization, things like this. So that was kind of what I was getting at some point during the night, where I was saying, use it for the things that it's really, really necessary for, and then keep the rest of it off-chain in Java and SQL.
Good question. Very good question. Further questions? Gentleman in the back again.
Thank you. Question is, what are the ways in which you can manage or mitigate volatility, and what would the signs be that that's working in pricing?
I mean, for Bitcoin or Ethereum, or have more people hold it. I mean, there's tons of whales out there that are just like manipulating markets essentially. So having more people hold it is definitely one. Regulate it, give more clarity around like what it is within certain jurisdictions. It's like definitely a good one. All these things.
Yeah, I mean, with more institutional players come into the game, we will see more and more derivative that could help. I mean, options, future, all these different instruments could help to reduce the volatility. But on one hand, that's not help a lot, because when you issue derivative, you're just coming back to the fallback to the old system when you need intermediaries. So I would say maybe interoperability between blockchain, where you can perform atomic swap, could help to resolve this volatility as well.
Yeah, but there's like a lot of bots that kind of do that already.
Yeah, I know.
All right, another question, gentleman back here with his hand up.
It is a lot less volatile than it used to be, by the way.
Yeah, this is a follow-on from that, obviously keeping in mind that this is such a new technology and actually quite an innovative way of changing a lot of the back processes that are going on. Positive question. So what are you looking at in the next couple of years do you think is really going to be a game changer? Okay, we've been talking a lot about regulatory requirements, but do you think it's going to be more people adopting it? Or who do you think is going to really be leading the push forward of this fantastic opportunity which we're seeing now?
Question from this side of the table?
I think basically the emerging markets are the ones that will probably push mass adoption the fastest. If there is no trustworthy government in place, if there is no financial institution that can actually help you participate in the economy, then you will have the biggest benefit of a C2C way of doing business. And once mass adoption is there and they are participating in global economy, then we will see larger adoption happening over here. I think basically the problem in Western Europe is that there is no problem to fix. There's inefficiency, but there's no real problem.
I think, banks getting on the bandwagon. We're already seeing it. So I'm already talking to some banks that are attempting to be regulated in the States, so that the ability to actually have cryptos in your bank. So I think the minute that happens, then the markets, the mass market will start to open, along with the influx of institutional money as well, which end of the year.
Nice prediction.
Along with regulation in some shape.
You want to go?
Go.
So I think, and what Ohalo is playing in, right, is the data governance space. Helping trace data lineage between databases. What we're doing right now is essentially maintaining metadata records about data that are referenceable on a blockchain. And I think that this is kind of the new revolution, kind of from the internet to cloud computing. And then this is the new one is metadata, actually. So right now we have all this data. People think data is the new oil, but nobody has the infrastructure to kind of extract that from the ground. It's just a bunch of ones and zeros and just like petabytes of databases that just sit in banks and other large enterprises and never get used. So you need context around it, and I think that's what blockchain allows you to do. Right now we're focused on the compliance data governance space because that data needs to be compliant to be usable. But if we can manage metadata about data governance, why couldn't we also manage metadata about like value or ownership or whether it should be processed by a GPU or a CPU? These are all like really valuable context around data that make that data as an oil future an actual thing. Yeah.
This is what I want to say. So.
Okay, so we're down to about the last 5 minutes of our evening together. Any final questions, or maybe a final question? Anyone? All done? Excellent. Okay, then let me take this opportunity to say thank you very much for coming to the event this evening. Thank you. Thank you as well to the gentlemen of the panel for taking time out of your busy schedules. And I know a couple of you traveled quite a ways to get here. Thanks for that. A couple of things to tease before we do go. If you'd like to know more about the four gentlemen up here on the panel and what they're up to, we have recorded podcast interviews with each of them discussing more in depth about what they're up to with their companies, and those will be released in the near future, and the details will be pushed out to you, so keep an eye out for that through the LSE Alumni Association in London. And lastly, if you'd like to speak to them more in depth right now, we're headed to the pub.
Can I?
Oh, please.
Can I get a quick plug?
Sure, absolutely.
So who in their companies who uses Google Drive as? All right, so we just released this awesome new tool. And we'd like everybody to test it out. It's kind of like our Oracle for our blockchain tool, but it can be run separately, and it scans your Google Drive for sensitive data per GDPR. And uses a machine learning algorithm to do that. So you can get a nice little report. You click a button and it does it in seconds. It's really nice. It's in beta right now, so let me know your feedback. Go to ohalo.co, ohalo.co/trial. Click a button, and you'll be there.
Excellent, excellent. And so if you're all familiar with I think it's the George IV pub owned by your institution. Does anybody not know where the pub is? Just slightly south here. We'll be repairing to the George IV pub just a few minutes walk away, and hope to see you there. Thanks very much.